Welcome to Rule 8 Politics, the show where we always tell the truth, where we at least don't lie. Sometimes we screw up and get stuff wrong, but we will always circle back, correct it. If any errors have been brought to our attention, it's impossible to always be correct. We at least acknowledge that, and we do our best to be truthful and honest all the time. Today is our pre-election special show. We're going to be talking about our election predictions, but first we're going to talk about the big stories of the week. Of course, I should say that my name is Zach Sacker, and I'm again here with my co-host Jeremy Sammons. A few of the stories we'll be talking about are Operation Autumn Hope, the big tech hearings with Jack Dorsey, Mark Zuckerberg, and Sundar Pichai, the CEOs of Twitter and Square for Jack Dorsey, Facebook for Zuckerberg, and Pichai is the CEO of Google. And we'll also be talking about a little bit about the fatal shooting of Walter Wallace Jr. in Philadelphia, as well as our predictions for the election. So I guess let's begin with our first topic, Operation Autumn Hope. Jeremy, you want to break down what Operation Autumn Hope was?
Yeah. So when this news broke earlier this week, I guess I was really surprised, just really shocked in the numbers that were produced from this operation. So what went down was there. This was in Ohio. There were 45 missing children found, 109 human trafficking survivors rescued, and 179 arrests were made. So it's just by the sheer numbers. It was the largest bust in Ohio's human trafficking history. And so what was going on here was they were rescuing victims of human trafficking and referring them to social services, recovering missing and exploited children, apprehending those seeking to have sex with a minor, and arresting male Johns seeking to buy sex. So I think when you hear the 179 arrests, all right, what's kind of frustrating with the story right now is that we don't know what the people that were arrested are being charged with. So it is, as somebody, from that 179, how many are being charged for just normal prostitution type stuff, right? Like, I think it's once we get that kind of weeded out from here and see like how many people were actively trafficking these people, how many were actually seeking sex with minors. That's, I think, when like the real crazy shit comes out.
Mm-hmm.
But then, I mean, 45 missing children found, 109 human trafficking survivors rescued. Those are, I mean, amazing numbers. So, I mean, huge props to the U.S. Marshals, and there was like over 50 agencies involved here. Huge props to all of them, and they all deserve our praise for this successful operation here.
Yeah, this was a positive story, and we never hear anything good coming out of the news. Everything is always negative, but 179 people arrested, 109 human trafficking victims rescued, including 45 children. It's just really an incredible story. 45 children who, hopefully after some counseling will be able to get back to normal life and be reunited with their families. There was this followed. There was also back in August. They found, this was before Operation Autumn Hope. There were other operations leading up to this right before. 25 found in Ohio, the same state, in August. Another 39 in Indiana, and 39 in. I have a little mistake in my notes here. 8 in Indiana and 39 in another state, which in my notes I also have listed as Indiana, but I know that's not correct. But anyway, leading up to this bust last week, back in August, the U.S. Marshals rescued a large number of other children, and on one hand, it's a good thing that we're finding these kids and busting these sex trafficking rings, but it's kind of like, scary that this stuff exists and in the United States, I mean, this is something that you would expect to be happening in like third world countries and whatnot elsewhere, not really here, but sex trafficking is a really big deal in the United States. And, I feel like every year there's a big story that's coming out, whether it's Jeffrey Epstein or, you know, um, um, Harvey Weinstein. There are these cases that are coming out that are just like showing that this is really a big deal here. And my question to you is, how do you think this impacts the QAnon conspiracy theory movement?
Well, I mean, like always, Q was right. uh, I definitely adds more fuel to the fire for that type of conspiratorial thinking, because, but with every outlandish conspiracy theory, there is always a grain of truth, a little bit of evidence, something that opens up that door that holy shit, maybe maybe fucking Hillary Clinton does drink the blood of children, It's but it's it starts with does human trafficking exist? Yes. To what extent? Who knows? And then here's a crazy statistic here.
Well, it seems like it's a big deal. That's what the
Yeah.
point I'm trying to make. Like it's
Right.
greater than I've ever imagined. If you told me that they were going to find a ring in 2020 with 109 trafficking victims, 45 children, I mean, I would have said that's not in the United States, maybe,
Like
in
Mexico, the cartel,
Mexico,
something like
yes,
that. Yeah.
exactly. That's something that the cartels would do, not here, but my God, it's a huge problem here.
Right. So this is pulled from the U.S. Marshals website here. Back in 2019, there was a reported of 23,500 cases of endangered young people reported to the organization, and it was likely that 1 in every 6 of those were victims of child sex trafficking. Which is that's insane. I mean, those numbers, it's hard to believe it's within our borders here in this country.
Yeah, it's
and especially in like places like Ohio, Indiana, like it strikes me as strange as like what are the conditions that lead up to those areas in particular becoming the hotbed for that type of activity? Like why is it so favorable in a place like Ohio? Like Pennsylvania makes sense because I mean it's a huge network hub for distribution. A lot of major companies have their distribution centers based in Indiana. So, okay, I get it. That makes sense. But Ohio?
Well, what I'm unsure of, I don't think this information's out there yet, but, were these kids found in Ohio? Were they from Ohio? Or were they brought in from elsewhere? So like,
good point.
Could they have been brought in from Florida or even from another country?
Right.
That I don't think is public information, at least not yet. I couldn't find it. I tried to look, but still, it's just really, really incredible. And again, props to everybody involved in this case in busting these people. Was going to ask you something else on this, but I'm blanking here.
How do you think that this bust will affect the defund the police movement?
I honestly, I don't think it's going to impact it all that much, sadly, because the people involved in this investigation, the detectives and whatnot, and the U.S. Marshals, they're not the same people patrolling the streets, right? For the most part. So, I mean, the defund the police movement, I just don't see people really connecting the dots there all that much. I mean, the concerns of BLM are more directed at what's going on in their communities, what they see as injustices played out on their streets between the police and between people of color. Um, Hunting down um, sex traffickers is kind of like a totally different ball game, I think. And it's more of I think that there are federal officials involved in that versus local police officers. Um, and also, this story didn't really get all that much coverage this week. I think it's something important, and so do
Yeah.
you, and that's why we're talking about
Yeah.
it. But it really wasn't on the news at all. It was like a quick headline that popped up when this first went down, and that was it. In fact, I didn't once see them talk about this on. I watch a lot of news, Fox and CNN mostly. I go back and forth between the two. Maybe they did talk about it and I just missed it, but I don't recall seeing them talk about this at all this week. I just saw it elsewhere. I think on a article that I found on my phone somehow. So I mean, they're not talking about it. It's not. I bet a lot of the people listening or watching this podcast, this may be news to them, and if it is, if you're watching this or listening and this is news to you, I think that kind of proves my point that it's probably just not going to impact the defund the police movement all that much because it's just not, in the front of people's mind. It's not. I think the QAnon people might be a little bit more vocal, and then they may be able to say, "Hey, can't defund the police. We need to, give them more funds. Look at all the good work that they're doing. They're saving these kids." But I don't think the BLM people are going to be listening and taking advice from the QAnon people, and vice versa, really. So I don't think it really has that much of an impact.
Yeah, I
What do you
think
say?
you might be right, but I think whenever I come into contact with the defund the police uh, type people, this will be the one thing that I always refer to. I'll be like, well what about this?
Mhm.
When you say defund the police, like, what do you really mean? Do you mean defund just your local police? Because I think this whole thing started at the local level,
Yeah.
and then got bigger and bigger. So if you don't have these people on the ground, these people to reach out to, I mean, like when you see something crazy, or when you hear about a prostitution ring, like it's not your first instinct to be like, oh, I better call the fucking FBI. No, it's
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. All
I mean,
crimes begin local, usually,
right.
especially
Yeah.
when you're investigating it. And then sometimes it reaches the point where you got to get the feds involved, but it always begins local, and that's your local police. So, yes, you are correct about that. That's a good point.
So yeah, that's what I'm always going to, until something even crazier comes out. This is the story I'm going to refer to and be like, hey, this is why we should do exactly the opposite of what you're suggesting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. All right. Any other points on this? Should we move on to our next topic?
Let's move.
All right. Big tech. Jack Dorsey, CEO of Twitter and Square, Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Facebook, and Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, Alphabet, I should say, which is the parent company of Google. They were all on Capitol Hill this week, receiving a grilling from senators. This was after Facebook and Twitter decided to block a story critical of Joe Biden that was published by the New York Post. Conservatives have been sounding the alarm now for years about a left-wing bias that big tech companies have. A lot of much of Silicon Valley is, it's in California, liberal. You got a lot of left-wing people working at these tech companies, and there's been a concern that they've been silencing conservative voices. And, we're just a few days out from the election. A major story came out in the New York Post alleging corruption on behalf of Joe and Hunter Biden. It's a big story. It does seem like a big deal. And this was censored by first Twitter and then Facebook. I should say that I believe they both did reverse the censoring to an extent. They are able now to post these stories, but the New York Post is the fourth largest newspaper in the country, and it was founded by Alexander Hamilton. It's an old publication. Who, how, I'll give my quick take here, and then we'll go over. We'll see what you think. I don't know if you agree with me on this, but what gives Jack Dorsey the right to really interfere in our election this way? I mean, how should he have more of a say over what people get to read and hear than the New York Post? A publication that's been around for a few hundred years now, has been with us since our founding. It doesn't seem right to me. What say you?
Yeah, I think it's tricky. It's tricky. Like, all right, so do the sections of Section 230, do they need to be revised? Yeah, more than likely, yes, they do. I think or kind of how we've gotten ourselves here is that when companies like Google, Facebook, and Twitter were all founded, I mean, they had no idea that they were going to have this level of influence over American discourse and the American conversation. And I think, I mean, I don't think there's any way that they could have imagined how popular those platforms became, and like no one ever has been this popular. Like, there's never been one platform that so many people go to so frequently. So it's just tricky because there's nothing else to relate it to in our past. But it also begs the question: how much does the government have to say about what these private entities are allowed to do, what they can, what they can't do? So I think it strikes me as interesting that this argument is coming from the right instead of the left, just because it's traditionally outside their general role. Like, seeing the right campaign and advocate for so like the Trump administration is like highlighted for its lack of deregulation, rolling back regulations. And it's funny, or it strikes me as interesting to see them champion these this is like a massive regulation, be a huge changing to the internet as we know it. It strikes me as weird, a bit hypocritical perhaps, but I'm conflicted about it, about the direction we should go here. On one hand, I kind of feel like the Supreme Court ruling that allowed that bakery to discriminate against that gay couple based on religion, that's the same reason why any company can say you can't enter my store unless you're wearing a mask. That's like,
right.
That's the same legislation here.
Right. So
like if a company says, hey, you can't put that shit on my fucking website, see, this is where it gets fucked up. So, it's changing the law would have massive implications, and I think I really need to think a little more deeply about it before I strong for it or strong against. Well, I think we actually need to see like some proposals and compare and contrast them, because we also have a Congress that doesn't know dick about technology, that don't know dick about the internet. So, what do they want to do about it?
Well, Congress is split on the issue. You have the Democrats who want more censorship and oversight. they want these tech companies to play the role of moderator and take down what is considered to be misinformation or untruths. My concern is, how do you, who determines what is misinformation and what's not? And I think this New York Post article is a perfect example of that. There is nothing. I mean, the Bidens have not denied that it was Hunter Biden's laptop. That was definitely Hunter Biden's laptop that was left at that shop, and we know that because if it wasn't, they'd be saying, "Hey, that was a plant. That's not Hunter's." We're not hearing that. They're not denying it. They're just trying not to talk about it. They'd rather censor it. And I mean, the mainstream media outlets, which are mostly left leaning or at least anti-Trump, CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times, and on. They're not even talking about this. These corruption allegations. The story with the laptop from hell, as Trump likes to call it, is a news story that just came out with the publication that the New York Post did. But there have been corruption concerns about Hunter Biden with his dealings in Ukraine, getting paid. I've heard all sorts of figures, but a shit ton of money for essentially just being a link between the vice president, Hunter Biden, and this Ukrainian energy company, Burisma, with no energy experience, no experience in Ukrainian affairs. This has been a story for a long time, and the mainstream media has refused to cover it. And I think that was a major failing, because had they covered it, Joe Biden may not be the the presidential nominee for the Democrats right now. They may have instead picked somebody else who doesn't have all this baggage, and of course, whatever was being published back then was kind of the tip of the iceberg. And now we have this laptop that basically confirms a lot of those concerns that initially popped up back then. Now it looks like Joe Biden himself was in on this, possibly getting a kickback. He's referred to as the big guy who needs 10% of the payout. So I think I went on a little bit of a rant there, but I did want to reference Section 230, which you brought up before. I did want to circle back to that real quick and explain what that is. Section 230, because this is in the news a lot now. Section 230 was part of the Communications Decency Act of 1996, and it basically provides immunity for website publishers so that they're not liable for third-party content. So if you have a website that has a forum where anybody, you, me, your mom can go post stuff on there, Twitter can't be sued for what somebody says on their platform. They're not responsible. This is different than what traditional media companies have. If the New York Post, for example, publishes something that is false, they can be sued for spreading misinformation. There's laws on the books already. It's I always get confused between libel and slander. I'm not an attorney or a law guy by any means, but if you are a media company, a traditional media company, you can be sued for spreading false information. But if you're a platform protected under Section 230, you can't. And this was designed to basically encourage growth of the internet back in 1996, when the internet was very new. Websites were very concerned about having other people posting stuff on their growing sites, and how do we moderate millions of users interacting online and make sure that nothing false is said? You can't. It's an impossibility. So I think Section 230 was created with good intentions. And it possibly is still a good thing, but I think the understanding should be that these companies act like platforms, not like moderators. Because if they're going to be moderating and curating their content, then they appear to be acting more like traditional media companies, which don't have these liability protections in place. If people are going to be relying on Twitter or on Facebook to, it was on Facebook, therefore it must be true. I mean, if that's what people are going to believe, then um, um, people shouldn't believe that. Stuff that's put on Facebook, put on by stuff. Anybody can say anything on Facebook, Twitter, and that's where the battle is. But it's just such a slippery slope because when you have millions of people posting things, um, you know, uh, how do you fact check things, especially when it comes to politics, where you know um, the glass could be half full and at the same time half empty, and depending on the person who's looking at it is going to see something different. There are kind of multiple truths just depending on how you look at things, and it really just becomes up to the people in charge to censor what they want to censor, and that's when their own individual biases come out. And in a world full of misinformation, is always going to be misinformation out there. I think the only way to correct that is more information. Empower people to do their own research, do their own homework, get more information. Don't believe everything. We should be telling people, don't believe everything that you read on Facebook. Don't believe everything that you read on Twitter. Instead, it seems to me that the Democrats, and I'm picking on them here, want people to be able to believe everything that they see and read on Facebook and Twitter. No, people should have to, you go to school, and part of going to school is learning critical thinking. When you're learning how to, even at just the high school level, you're preparing for college. Um, maybe things have changed now, but we used to be told you can't use Wikipedia as a citation in your research papers because anybody could post things on Wikipedia. Therefore, it's not a credible source. We learned about credible and uncredible sources in high school, right? So, I mean, the American people should understand that not everything online is true. And that's the message really that our politicians should really be screaming about. Not everything is true online. Do your own homework. This QAnon stuff is not true. Here is the truth. Instead, they're just rushing to censor, and when you want to censor stuff, it makes people actually more curious about it. I think this New York Post story became a bigger deal than it was. I mean, it was a big deal, but I think it garnered more interest because it was censored. So it's just kind of self-defeating, and it comes from, in my opinion, a lack of trust of the American people to be able to decipher information for themselves. Sorry about the long rant.
No, it's fine. No, ideologically, where I stand on the issue is that no, they should not be censoring anything. I think even when it comes to Alex Jones, when it comes to QAnon, when it comes to anything as outlandish as you can imagine, I don't think anything should be removed from the internet, regardless of its content. However, I recognize that these companies do have rights at the same time, and if they wish to exercise them within the scope of the law as it's written, as well. It's like I disagree with their actions, but at the same time, I was like, well, you didn't do anything necessarily wrong. You didn't do anything illegal. Let me say that better. You didn't break the law here, but yeah, it's not cool what you did. So I mean,
Yeah,
that's just kind of
I mean,
how I feel.
I mean, you can argue that this right that they have to moderate the content, they only have because of Section 230. So it's kind of the government that is kind of giving them this right to curate their content because if you're curating, if you're picking and choosing what is published, then you're essentially a publisher. You're not really a platform anymore. You know, are they publishers or are they platforms? What should they be classified as? Uh, maybe people should be able to sue Twitter if somebody is lying on Twitter and Twitter doesn't remove it. I mean, if Twitter wants the responsibility if Twitter wants to be responsible for what's on their platform, if they feel that they're responsible, then they should actually be responsible. Maybe Section 230 should be removed, and that enacting Section 230 was government action, not I mean, the libertarian argument is government shouldn't be involved. Well, Section 230 is an example of how the government created this current situation. Without it, without Section 230, these platforms or publishers, whatever you want to call them, would really have to choose which they would want to act as. Do they want to strictly be a publisher, like a traditional newspaper, or do they want to be a platform? And I I don't know. It's very complicated, but I just ultimately think that you know there's a reason why the First Amendment is the First Amendment. The most sacred thing that we have as individuals is our thoughts and our right, our ability to express those thoughts. And I don't think any large institution, whether we're talking about governments or monopolies or multi-billion-dollar tech companies, because I don't necessarily think Twitter is a monopoly or even Facebook. There are other platforms out there, but it's very complicated. These companies don't fall into that those categories of monopoly or a competitive company. But I don't think any large institution really should have the ability to restrict what people are saying in public. And when you're writing something on Twitter, even though it's saved on a private server somewhere, it's in the public sphere. This is different than you know being in Walmart and shouting things that are offensive. That's a very different thing than saying something on Twitter, which is really a public square in a sense. So this is kind of a rare area where I kind of think the government needs to basically give these companies guidelines, and a lot of them, they want guidelines. I mean, it's very difficult and costly for these companies to play moderator. They have to employ people to search through tweets and check up on complaints. It's very expensive and costly. um, they do it because if they don't, the left gets really angry at them. If the government were just to come out and say, okay, the guidelines for the internet, we're updating Section 230. The new guidelines moving forward is that if you are a social media platform, you need to abide by First Amendment principles. Boom, that's it, and end the story. And people, if you're using these platforms, make sure you verify anything that you see. Take everything with a grain of salt. Do your own homework. Be a big boy, a big girl, and use your knowledge that you learned in high school. Make sure that the sources are, good sources. Don't just believe in everything. So that's just my thoughts, my feelings.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I'm conflicted on the situation. I just I agree some things probably do need to be changed, but I would like to look at the revisions that are going to be put on the table, because I think some of what they want to change might be even worse than what we currently have.
Yeah.
I think one thing that was, I'm probably going to say this wrong or not the way that I want to, but it's something like the the system that Twitter has kind of worked in this situation, meaning that they it was due to the community backlash they got. They realized, yeah, we fucked up. Yeah, I'm gonna reverse that and
Hmm.
not do that again. Um, so maybe the result was 230 as it's written, working correctly.
Hmm.
I don't know. It's like I'm not saying that's like my position. It's just an idea and maybe a different way to look at the problem.
Yeah. Um, One good example here. Um, Quick shout out to this person who tweeted this on Twitter, at Alejandro J Puega or Puga. Sorry, Alejandro, if I got your name wrong there. But I saw he tweeted this on Twitter. He says, "I guess promoting to volunteer for President Trump is considered a quote harm or a crime according to Instagram. Now I'm currently locked out of my account. This is a clear attempt to censor conservative voices 4 days out from election day. This needs to stop." And he included a picture basically that was banned on Instagram, and it was just him wearing a Latinos for Trump shirt, and he had a bunch of Trump, what looked like billboard signs behind him. It was nothing offensive or wrong, you know. It was definitely not harm or a crime, and he was locked out of his account for that image. I mean, he got it reinstated. He followed up to the tweet after he complained to Instagram about it, but also got this going on Twitter, and this got a whole bunch of retweets and stuff, and he was able to get the attention of a lot of people, which kind of pressured Instagram, which is really essentially Facebook. Instagram is owned by Facebook, but like who decides that to censor that? Why should that be censored? That's just crazy. The people making these decisions to censor other people are human beings, and human beings are by definition imperfect beings. We all make mistakes. So I mean, when you're dealing with a platform with a lot of people on it, you should just assume that some of the information on there is wrong, and it's just way more dangerous, in my opinion, to give people the power to censor other people. Because
Yeah,
once that
as it
power
did.
once that power exists, you can really use that to nefarious ends. You
Right. As
can you
it
can
did.
use that to sway elections. You can use that to totally shut down and discredit certain individuals and certain movements. This is something that if it falls into the wrong hands, it could really, really damage our democracy. I think that the bulk of the people are usually in the right most of the time, and it just concerns me when a select few people in positions of power at big tech companies have the ability to essentially control the national dialogue. That scares me.
Yeah, it definitely did seem like there was an intentional and coordinated effort to squash the Unity 2020 movement on Twitter.
Hmm.
Like their account is still banned,
Yeah.
which for no reason.
Hmm.
Um,
That's
so yeah,
another good example right there. They did
yeah,
nothing wrong.
right. Eric Weinstein was banned off of Facebook for temporarily as well. So yeah, so these people are getting caught in these filters that they shouldn't be, and but it's so fucking hard to regulate this shit. I mean, when you have a platform, you have billions of users, man.
Yeah.
It's
it's
so hard to.
impossible. The regulators are going to get stuff wrong. That's why just free speech principles. Just there's going to be look. There's going to be a lot of truth, but there's going to be some mistruths. There's going to be some meanness going on and hatred. But you know what? Words are not violence. I think that's another problem that is occurring in our culture now. I think a lot of young people are starting to equate mean words with violence, and they are not the same thing. It's a really good book on this. The Coddling of the American Mind. Coddling of by Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt. I read it about a month or two ago. Excellent read. I highly recommend people check out this book. And it's all about how it's about basically these censorship movements and how they began on our college campuses, and they're now beginning to take over a lot of workplaces, and that's kind of what's going on at Spotify right now with Joe Rogan. For those of you who aren't familiar, I'm sure you are if you're listening to this podcast, because if you're listening to this podcast, you probably like podcasts, and that probably means that you occasionally check out the king of podcasting, Mr. Joe Rogan. He's the most popular podcaster in the country. And he has, a few months ago, he signed a deal with Spotify to move his stuff over to Spotify. He previously was not available on there. Beginning, I believe, in January, he will be exclusively on Spotify. And since moving over there, employees at Spotify have been pressuring the company to censor Joe Rogan. They don't like some of the guests that he's had on. They say things that could be mean. And again, this new generation of I want to say kids, but they're really young adults now working at these companies. They're equating meanness with violence, and it's not true. And a lot of the guests that they're claiming to be hateful, mean people, they're not. They're just like people questioning whether trans men who become women should be allowed to compete in sports, in women's sports. That's a legitimate argument to be made there. If you've been a guy for 30 years and you've had testosterone flowing through you, and if you've had those kind of benefits as it relates to muscle creation and whatnot, for you to all of a sudden just become a woman one day and sign up to compete in track and field on a women's team, and you're crushing records left and right. That's not right. That's not fair to women who are involved in women's sports, who now have to compete against biological men, which I think I could actually be censored for saying that, what I just said, biological men. That seems to be an offensive term to a lot of people. We're just starting to get really crazy with the censorship stuff, and it makes it really difficult to have an honest discussion when you have to be very careful about everything that you might say or your guest might say, and it's just really dystopian. You should be able to have open and honest conversations with people. And I love how Joe Rogan had Alex Jones back on this week just to really piss off all those Spotify employees. It was a great episode. You check it out.
Oh my God, it's one of the best.
Yeah.
It's the last half hour. The last half hour is actually pretty sad, and I think it really humanizes and personalizes Alex Jones in a way that it shows a side of Alex that you don't get to see very often. So I thought it was, I thought it was perfect. Looking forward to their debate coverage, not debate, election night coverage.
Yes. Yeah. That's going to be good. I think they are going to live stream and get really drunk and just watch the results come in. Right?
Yeah.
Is that what they said they're doing?
That's what it seems like to me, man. So yeah, it's The end of the world party they did back in 2016 was, I think, one of the best moments in internet history. So I think 2020 will live up to just how good it was last election cycle.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't watch that one, but this year I probably will. Um, yeah, I've only got into Joe Rogan. I don't know, within like maybe like 2 years ago or so. I don't think I was really watching his stuff in 2016 during the last cycle. But anyway, should we move on?
Let's move on.
All
So
right.
yeah,
What do we got now? The riots.
yeah, I just say
Yeah.
yeah, we can talk about the riots a little bit, but I think it's the election, and I can't believe it's finally here.
It's finally here. Thank God. Our long national nightmare is over. I think that's what uh, who said that? President Ford, when he first took office after Nixon and Spiro Agnew, the vice president, resigned. Um, but tell you the truth, I don't think it's exactly true what I just said. I think we are in for a reckoning. But what do you think is going to happen?
It's gonna be crazy. I think I don't know. It's like it's hard for me to put a number on how sure I am, but it feels like, how about I say I feel? How about that? That might be more appropriate. I have a feeling that Biden's going to take it. Um, I feel like the electoral map on Predicted, the online betting website, is the most accurate one out there. And the electoral map that they have drawn up is they can't really decide if Biden's going to win with 305 electoral votes or if he wins with 290, which I believe it's
Mm-hmm.
North Carolina that the vote keeps swapping on itself. So, man, it's the people that are really putting their money where their mouth is. Like, no bullshit. Like, I feel so strongly that this is going to be the outcome of the election that I will put money towards it. I think that gives that method a little more, man, it's a little more credible than just what you get from like a CNN poll, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And that's saying Joe Biden by how much?
Joe
Predicted?
Biden, right now it's at Joe Biden's at 305, and that would have Trump at, I can't do the math in my head,
Okay.
233.
Okay. And you need 270 to win the
Right.
White House.
Right. Yeah, so
And of course, we're
305.
talking about.
Right. Well, it gets a little trickier here too. So let's say on election night, that would we'll just use Pennsylvania as an example here. Let's say Biden wins, but the race is so close that you can't really. It's within the margin of error, right? So we have a 2000 Bush v. Gore Florida situation. We could have it in Pennsylvania. We could have it in Ohio. We could have it in Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, maybe Texas, Nevada, Arizona. Like all these states that could be so close. It only needs to be, fucked up in a couple states or even one to throw the whole thing into chaos. So, I mean, would we see an elective Trump try to do some kind of executive order where maybe Trump wins the popular, but it's within such a close margin, and the executive order to stop a recount? I know he's been talking about stopping the vote counting on November 3rd, which I think is
Yeah,
very
I don't know
stupid.
if he could
Uh,
do that.
well,
I don't think he
certainly
can
hope
do
that. Well,
that. Yeah.
all right. Well, if he can't, well, his Supreme Court picks that will come into
Hmm.
play very quickly. And would
Yes.
they rule in his favor? Would they rule? I would say on the side of democracy. Who knows? Um,
Yes.
what do you
So of
think? I
course
mean, I think.
now, So,
Oh, you go ahead.
of course, now Amy Coney Barrett has been sworn in as a Supreme Court justice, which gives the conservative wing of the court. Um, I think it's um, I forget the breakdown, but the conservatives have a clear
5-4.
advantage in it's 5-4.
Mm.
So I mean it's still pretty tight, but conservatives definitely have an advantage in the Supreme Court. I want to read a little bit of this article from NPR that I think breaks down the current situation very well. It does so better than I can just freeballing here. Again, this is from npr.org, and this was published yesterday, so it's very recent. The final NPR Electoral College map analysis shows Democrat Joe Biden going into Election Day with a clear edge, while President Trump has a narrow but not impossible path through the states key to winning the presidency. Among states leaning or likely to go in a particular candidate's direction, Biden leads by 279 electoral votes to Trump's 125. A candidate needs 270 electoral votes to win a majority of the votes available and the presidency. So Biden's going into this with, um, 9 electoral votes more than he needs to become the president. That means Trump needs to flip at least one state that is at least likely to be a blue state.
Which I think it's
So
interesting
let me
that
continue here.
well, if I can just jump in for one second, I think it's interesting that
Yeah,
NPR
there you go.
is that uses that breakdown for like what he's entering into the race with. Real Clear Politics, they estimate he's stepping up to the plate with 216 electoral votes. They still have Trump at 125, but yeah, they'd say that he only for sure has 216. But go ahead.
So NPR is just filling out the map a little bit more. The difference is some of those swing states that Real Clear Politics is calling a toss-up, too close to call. NPR is kind of saying, we kind of think this is going to go blue. They're speculating here, and everyone's speculating because the election hasn't happened yet. But let me continue a little bit with this article. That means even if Trump were to win all of the
If I could jump in one last time, I'll let you go. I swear to God. If you look at Real Clear Politics, if you look at Real Clear Politics and remove the toss-ups and just go strictly on polling in all the swing states, then Joe Biden's at 345. Just strictly based on polling and nothing else. Joe Biden has 345 electoral votes. I don't think that's what we're going to see, but.
Yeah, that's a
interesting.
Big win.
Yeah. All right, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So that means even if Trump were to win all the toss-up states, he'd still come up 11 electoral votes short and would need to win over at least one state currently leaning in Biden's direction. The Trump campaign has its eyes on Pennsylvania, which, of course, Trump won last time. It has trended blue, but we just had an outbreak of chaos in Pennsylvania this last week. So we had another situation where a black man was shot by police, shot and killed. And the result after that, there was a lot of unrest, riots, looting, protesting, demonstrations, whatever you want to call it. There was chaos for a few nights in a row. I believe it's still ongoing in Philadelphia and elsewhere. And Trump is trying to be the law and order president. Do you think that's going to impact how Pennsylvania in particular votes? Do you think that this is going to help Trump in this key battleground at all?
I think if Trump wins Pennsylvania, you will be able to look at that of what's going on in Pittsburgh and say that is the reason why Trump won. And I think it is appropriate and accurate to make that statement. I think what's kind of at play is if you were a a moderate, if you were if you were a Obama Trump voter that was now leading Biden this election. um, I think it comes down if you did your mail-in vote already or not. I haven't looked at
Yeah.
their early voting numbers just yet, but I mean, if you've already voted in favor of Biden, it's you can undo it, but it can be a lengthy process. And actually, no, they're actually passed. I believe today was the cutoff for early voting. So I think if you voted already, I think you might be screwed unless I guess maybe you could probably cancel your vote and then vote in person on election day and do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not sure how many people will or would do that. Um,
Yeah.
but yes, I think this will have huge implications. Maybe, and if it's not for the presidential race in 2020 or anything else that's on the maybe this ballot is not affected by it, but come 2022, if if this type of activity is still commonplace in 2022, people will remember how Pittsburgh burned, how Portland burned, how New York, basically every major city in this country was on fire. That could have,
Mm-hmm.
and if it continues down this path, in 2022 will be a reckoning for anyone who supports uh, these actions.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Um, Let me continue a little bit with this article because there's some more interesting stuff in here. Um, this month, we moved Arizona from lean Democrat to toss up. So Arizona is trending in Trump's direction. Texas, after much hesitation, from lean Republican to toss up. So that's going in the opposite direction. If Trump loses Texas, Trump has no chance. He needs to win Texas. I think Austin, which is my new city. It's the fastest growing city in the country, and a lot of people have been moving here from California and New York. Essentially expensive blue states. A lot of them are bringing their politics here with them. I've seen a lot of bumper stickers saying "Don't California my Texas." So it's a concern that Texas is going to become a blue or at least a purple state, and Democrats do think that they can win here. They are competing, so we'll have to see. But nobody's going to know until after Election Day. Um, they moved Montana from likely Republican to lean Republican, and New Hampshire from lean Democrat to likely Democrat. Not entirely sure what those last two statements mean. Um, Trump faced a similar predicament in 2016, though if he were to win this time, it would indicate an even greater polling error than was seen in key states 4 years ago. So essentially, NPR is saying this is going to be a harder election for Trump than it was 4 years ago. The math is daunting, but does not rule out Trump. It does not rule Trump out entirely. He is within the margin of error in all 7 of the toss-up states and the one toss-up congressional district in Maine. Unlike every other state, Nebraska and Maine are not winner take all. They apportion their electoral votes through a combination of statewide vote and congressional district vote. In Texas and Ohio, Trump currently leads narrowly in the polling averages. So Trump is ahead right now in Texas and Ohio. In the others, Georgia, Iowa, Florida, North Carolina, Arizona, and Maine's 2nd congressional district, Biden leads by about 3 percentage points or less on average. If all those go Trump's way, and if all the states leaning toward Biden, except Pennsylvania, stick with the former vice president, suddenly it would be 259 to 259. That would make Pennsylvania the decider, and it's a state that could take longer to count its vote this year because it's not used to processing the high amount of mail-in ballots it's receiving. That could result in a scenario with an election hanging in the balance well past election night, which is going to happen. We are not going to know who the president is on election night. I can almost guarantee you that. Again, speculation on my behalf, but don't think we're going to know who the president is on election night. Peeling off Michigan by itself would also give Trump enough electoral votes in this scenario, as would winning a combination of Wisconsin and the one electoral vote in Nebraska. So in short, there's a lot of uncertainty heading into Tuesday. Yes, Biden has been constantly ahead nationally and holds small but consistent leads in the competitive states. But for lots of Democrats, well, they've heard that before. When all the votes are counted, it's very possible we could see a Biden blowout or a Trump squeaker. And there is more in this article, but that's all I really wanted to read. NPR.org, they do some good work occasionally. I shouldn't say occasionally. I love NPR. I actually do like a yearly contribution to one of their partner networks, I guess, that puts out their signal of like, I don't know, $30 a year or something. It's small, but anyway, they're a good organization. One thing that this article is not accounting for that I think is kind of a big deal is I think the Trump vote is undercounted. And Michael Moore actually said the same thing. I watched him on The Rising this week with Crystal Ball and Sagar. What's his last name? He's got a tough one.
And Jetty.
And Jetty, yes. Sagar and Jetty and Crystal Ball. They have a great show called The Rising. You can get it, or just Rising, I think. It's on YouTube. Free content. Crystal is on the left and Sagar is on the right, but they're both moderates. They get along wonderfully, and they're able to present news in a pretty unbiased manner. They had Michael Moore on as a guest, and although I disagree with Michael Moore on 99% of things, he actually knows his stuff when it comes to electoral politics. He predicted Trump would win in 2016, and he was basically saying that the Trump vote is undercounted, and I believe this too. When people conduct polls and they call up people, I think the Trump people are more likely to not answer or refuse to say who they're supporting. They're very skeptical of the deep state and of the cancel culture going on right now in the left. I can easily see in some not so distant dystopian future, people trying to figure out other people's politics by pretending to be a pollster and calling up their house and trying to see who they're voting for, and then if you're supporting the wrong guy, all of a sudden you're out of a job or something. I can easily see that going on. And to a lot of the Trump voters who believe in this deep state and a rigged election and all that, they're keeping quiet about their politics. They're not putting yard signs out. I mean, a lot of them are, but a good portion of them are staying quiet about who they're supporting. So he was basically saying whatever Biden's lead is in the polls, you should cut in half. And that kind of, makes it much more of a competitive race.
Which it is. I do agree that the lead that Biden has currently in the poll is not accurate whatsoever. To what extent, who knows? But I mean, there's plenty of reason for someone to still lean Trump or to be even hardcore Trump supporter. Like when you look at what he's done in terms of foreign policy, the trade war with China, the southern border. There's plenty of reasons to actually to still be on the Trump train. His stance against critical race theory. I mean, these are things that are important to a lot of voters, and those things resonate with them. I mean, abortion. I mean, come on, I mean, like
fracking.
right? Yeah, the pro-choice or I'm sorry, the pro-life movement has probably never been as ramped up as they are right now. At least probably since like Reagan. Like I think that they feel
Mhm.
like they have a real shot of getting Roe overturned, and I mean, best believe they are not sitting on the sidelines this time around.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I know I kind of floated this idea in a past podcast that we did. I was very surprised that they actually moved so swiftly with the Amy Coney Barrett nomination. I thought that they would publicly look like the Republicans are trying to get her through, but in the last minute, make it so like, hey, show up and vote, and if Trump is reelected, then we'll move the nomination forward to kind of encourage those right to life people to actually show up and vote for Trump. But I mean, I guess they're also looking at the possibility of this being a contested election, and they just want to get the get her sworn in already and all over with, so that she's already in place to possibly rule on who the next president should be. Because you mentioned Florida early on and what happened in 2000 with Bush versus Gore. We're going to be seeing that, I think, in many states. There's going to be many Floridas this time around. Um, I don't think we're going to know who the president is on election night. And I just think that there are going to be so many different cases that the Supreme Court's going to have to decide, relating to different states and different, districts in different states. I don't know if we're going to know who the president is by inauguration day. I'm a little nervous about that. You
Yeah,
know?
we might see a Nancy Pelosi presidency.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
we
I
could
mean
see. Yeah.
I mean the chances are greater than zero. I mean, other situations greater than zero. The West Coast seceding. You know, you know, factional violence in the street. Um,
Hmm.
so
Oh, there's going
much.
to be violence,
Yeah, it's. I mean, but
regardless who
God,
wins. There's going to be rioting and violence. Um,
I mean, God damn.
I think there's a very good chance we go. You go.
Oh, I say, please, for the love of God, can we not have a civil war to instate Joe
Yeah.
fucking Biden? Like, come on. So
Yeah.
not worth it. Not worth it.
Um,
Isn't that kind of funny? Like, if we had a whole civil war just to put a fucking decrepit, mentally declining geriatric into the White House, like,
yeah. Scary times, man. What I really think. So I am 31. The first year I voted was 2008. That's when Obama was elected. That was the first election I participated in, and I've kind of been paying attention to politics since then. And my gut, all right, I mean, this is completely unscientific, but my gut has been correct for the most part on every election since then, including the midterms. So I knew Obama was going to win in 2008. 2010, I had a feeling that the Republicans were going to do very well. They did. 2012, I thought Obama was going to win re-election. He did. 2016, 2014, I skipped. I thought the Republicans were going to do very well again, and they did. 2016, I almost bet my friend a decent chunk of change that Trump was going to win. And I cowered out. It was on me, but the money was there. He was ready to bet. I have some friends that like to gamble on everything, and I remember where we were. My buddy Joe and I were in our favorite hometown bar, and he was challenging me to put, I think it was $100 on it, and he was going to give me odds. And I just chickened out, but my gut was telling me that Trump was going to win. Um, the 2018 midterms, I thought the Democrats were going to do great, and they did. Um, My gut this time around is telling me we're going to have two presidents. It's just it's not saying Trump or Biden. It's just saying chaos. And um, I really hope my gut is wrong.
Yeah,
I
me
don't.
too.
I don't know
I
though.
feel the same way, man. Yeah, I feel the exact same way. I am not going to be surprised regardless of the outcome. If Trump wins, I'm not surprised. If Trump wins in a landslide, I would be a little more surprised. But
Yeah.
if Biden wins by if Biden secures 350 electoral votes, like I won't be surprised. If he only gets to like 275, I wouldn't be surprised.
Mm-hmm.
If there's electoral tie, I'd be like, okay, well, saw that coming, kind of.
Yeah.
uh, uh, yeah,
So what
it's
happens in the event of an electoral tie?
then I believe. All right, so I might be saying this wrong, but I believe that each state would appoint a different electorate than the electoral college. So they would. I fuck. I might be. Actually, I don't even want to speculate, but it's in the Constitution somewhere that
Mhm.
was like even it's the same place that puts the electoral college in the Constitution. That's the same amendment that they'd be referencing. As like the electoral college is really by choice. Like the states by choice decide to engage with the electoral college, where they could say, "Hey, instead of that, this is what we're going to do instead." And so you could
Mhm.
put people in this position or this this new type of electoral college that you could depending on who's in control, you could decide the fate of your state. So Biden potentially could win a state. It's too close to call, and so uh, let's say but the Republicans are in control. They're going to say, well, these are the people that we put in this position here, and then that's how the vote's going to go. Tough shit. Um, I
Mhm.
think I think also what we could see here too. It's more faithless electors. There was quite a few
Mhm.
back in 2016. I would be, that's another thing. I would not be surprised if there are more faithless electors than what we had last time around, which adds more
Mhm.
chaos
And that is
to the
of course
situation.
that yeah. And a faithless elector. Correct me if I'm wrong here. It's basically somebody who is an elector who is supposed to vote. They're supposed to vote how their state went. Like if Florida votes for Trump, when the electoral college gathers behind closed doors and they do the actual vote to decide who becomes president, they designate certain electors. They're supposed to, if Florida goes red, they're supposed to vote for Trump, but they could vote for somebody else instead, really, right?
Right. Yeah. So like in 2016, there was votes cast for like Colin Powell, John Kasich.
Mm,
There were some other ones too. But, those are the two that I can remember off the top of my head.
yeah.
So there's like
Um,
no,
Interesting stuff.
man, like nobody knows how
Um,
this is going to go.
Real quick before we wrap up, hypothetical question here: if Trump loses, and let's say it's a Democratic landslide, right? A big blue wave just crushes the whole country. What's the future of the Republican Party?
Hard to say. I hope I hope the Republican Party actually does retain some elements of nationalism and populism. Yeah, I hope that it's not the same flavor as Trump, like the
Mhm.
bombastic, ridiculous. I mean, just the vitriol. The I think that shit all needs to die. Um, but
Yeah.
but I think the the ideology of America first, that definitely needs to stay. That is the type of Republican Party I want in this country. I truly I want them to be the populist nationalist party. No mistake about
Yeah.
it. But yeah, it's the authoritarian elements. There, I think Trump is not a racist. Trump is not a xenophobe. However, he does draw that thinking out of the woodwork, and it's kind of the same way we've talked about Pride, or I've talked about Pride Boys in the same light. Um, it's also been said, not every Trump supporter is a racist, but every racist voted for Trump, right?
Yeah. Right.
I think that stuff they need to refine their identity to where it is more appealing. In this election, you can see it. There is a larger black support for Trump. There is a large Hispanic support for Trump. Hispanic males are leading heavier for Trump than they are for Biden. So it shows that they're
Wow.
like that message is resonating. However, they need to quash out any criticism of them being racist, xenophobic, homophobic, all the isms and obics that are out there that are labeled upon them. So I think that's what I hope. What do you hope?
Um, I mean, it's hard to say. Like, yeah, it needs to lose the bombacity, the absurdity that, that is Trumpism. But there are certain elements of Trumpism that are okay. The America First message. Um, I, I I like it. I don't love it. I don't want it to be America alone. And that's what it kind of sounds a little bit like to me. But like our NATO partners need to be paying more. We shouldn't be footing the entire bill for NATO, or just about the entire bill. Um, there are certain things that Trump has done that traditional Republicans would have never touched, and I'm glad he's moved the party um, in that direction. Moved it towards addressing China in a constructive manner. Um, so I hope it gets a remake. I hope it keeps some of the elements, but changes others. I hope that the new Republican Party is better at reflecting or turning away racists. It's not good that the Republican Party is seen as the party that's more friendly to racists. That's not a good thing. I hope it really takes on more of I hope it becomes more libertarian in certain senses, but also will regulate where regulation needs to be, like the whole free speech thing and censorship that we were talking about before. I think that could be a major platform of the Republican Party moving forward to stand behind free speech principles. I think it's a very big deal, and I think it's a winning message. Um, free speech, controlled and fair immigration. We're going to let in refugees and people who really need to come in who are fleeing violence, but we're not just going to let in everybody. We're going to vet people, and we're going to put more weight behind merit. I think that's a winning argument. When it comes to taxes and the economy, still argue for small government and low taxes. I'd like to see the Republican Party adopt a universal basic income or a freedom dividend. It's really just essentially tax policy. It's not that far off from what Republicans already support. I'd love to see Andrew Yang run as a Republican. I think he would get a much better reception as a Republican than he did as a Democrat. I mean, the liberal networks really colluded against him and treated him very unfairly, I felt. Um, so, the whole Yang Media blackout situation. Anybody who followed Andrew Yang is very familiar. And yeah, so it's just and push away from identity politics. The future of the Republican Party has to be, because the Republican Party under Trump definitely engages in a version of identity politics. I don't like identity politics. It needs to be the party, or I would hope it would be the party of unity, of higher principles. When the Democrats say we're the party for Black people, Latinos, Chinese, gays, lesbians, straights, I hope the Republican Party just says we're the party for everybody, all Americans. We're all Americans. We're all human beings. We're all one big family, regardless of race, creed, et cetera, et cetera. Which they kind of do to an extent now, but then Trump says some inflammatory stuff, retweets a video with a guy yelling white power in the video, and it kind of becomes this dog whistle to racists. So that needs to change. So yeah, if Trump loses in a big way, there is some hope that there would eventually emerge a new Republican movement or a new right-wing party altogether that's a little bit more inclusive and a little bit more along the lines I just laid out. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I think for exactly the reasons you laid out is why I think we should have an active or an elected Green Party and an elected Libertarian Party, because and the Democrats and the Republicans, we have this party within a party thing that's not fucking working. Like, to have progressives
Mm-hmm.
and the same thing with all the other Democrats, to have Trump versus what do you even call it now, that Trumpists versus never Trumpers in the same party. Like, I would rather I would rather like the never Trumpers just be libertarians, so we could just like clearly identify what they really stand for. Same thing with the Democrats. If you don't really, if you're for Medicare for all, if you're for these other socialist type programs, just I wish you could just be a green, and so we could like clearly know, like, this is what you're about. If you want the Green New Deal, all this stuff. I don't like how it's currently set up, because it's nothing. When you can't even have agreement in your own party, like nothing good, is produced from it.
That won't change unless we get ranked choice voting, which is something that we desperately need. I could see a scenario where the Republican Party collapses altogether for a few years and the Libertarian Party maybe takes its place, or a new party. We've had that happen before. We used to have the Whig Party, and then that dissolved, and the Republican Party took its place. And before the Whig Party, it was the Federalists. We've always had two parties in this country, but there have been some changes in those parties. First, it was the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, I think they call themselves, which really is the Democratic Party. They've kind of been in existence since the beginning, and then the other party has the opposition to that has several times dissolved and created a new party in its place. The Federalists, the Whigs, and the Republicans. Anyway, we'll have to see what happens and hope for the best.
Yeah. Besides the presidential election, is there anything else that you're keeping an eye on November 3rd?
Um, well, the Senate is a big deal. There's a very good chance that the Democrats, if they win the White House, they could take the Senate too, which will give the Democrats a monopoly on power, essentially. Um, so I'm voting with a mixed ballot. I kind of like to see, even though I can't stand Mitch McConnell, I'd like him to be gone. I'd rather the Republicans keep the Senate. If the Democrats take the White House, this way we have a little bit of gridlock, and if it would force them to compromise a little bit. And I don't necessarily think it's really a good idea to have one party able to push through whatever legislation that they want at any given time, because then that, in our polarized environment, like Obamacare, for example, it turned healthcare into a political football, which was not good. That's the biggest reason why Obamacare failed, was essentially because Republicans did everything that they can to make it fail, and insurance companies were faced with a lot of uncertainty around the law. Is it going to be struck down in the courts? What's going to happen? And when there's uncertainty, prices go up. So, um, like, so the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that Trump got through, during when that was back when the Republicans controlled everything, in the first 2 years of the Trump presidency. Every company that received a major tax cut at that time knew it was temporary, because when the Democrats come back and retake the White House, which inevitably they probably will this cycle, but not definite, as we just went through. There's a very good chance that these tax cuts are going to be repealed. Just about every Democrat wants to repeal them, especially for high income earners and corporations. So, I mean, when these companies got the tax cut, a lot of them were thinking, we got to be prepared for when we're going to have to start repaying these taxes again. Maybe we shouldn't use this money to reopen a huge facility right here. We should hang on to it and assume, we're going to have to pay it back in the future. So, just when laws are passed without bipartisan support, it becomes a political football, and it creates a lot of uncertainty around the law. People can't depend on the law remaining in place for years to come, and it's just not good for our entire system. So I'd like the Republicans to maintain control of the Senate if Joe Biden wins. So I'm going to be, I don't expect you to tell everybody who you're voting for, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to be casting my first ever vote for a Democrat for president, but I'm voting red pretty much down the ballot. But there's actually a libertarian running in my congressional district. I think I'm going to give that guy the vote. So I'll have a D, an R, and an L all on my ballot. And everything else will probably be R.
Interesting. Yeah, I think. I'm
yeah.
here in Missouri, so Missouri is heavily leaning towards Trump. There's no way that Biden's going to take Missouri. So in Missouri, a vote for Biden is a protest vote. It means nothing. So I will be using my vote to vote for what appears to be Joe Jorgensen. I'm going to vote for whichever third-party candidate has a better shot at reaching 5%. According to the polls right now, it's clearly Joe Jorgensen. I think Howie Hawkins, God bless him, I like him. He just doesn't have the energy behind him like Joe does. So that's who I'm voting for president. I will also likely have a mixed ballot. There are some Democrats that are in my district that really suck, that didn't even run a campaign and somehow like won their primary. It's a whole thing we can talk about later on. But yeah, I will have a mixed ballot as well. I'm very glad that we have open primaries here in Missouri, so I have the ability to do that.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. We
that's great.
have open elections. We have closed primaries. We have open elections. I said that
Mm,
incorrectly.
mhm.
So
Yeah.
so yeah, I'm pumped. I'm ready. I think
Okay.
if I could talk about the other elections or even issues that I'm keeping an eye uh, on Tuesday we have votes to legalize marijuana, recreational marijuana. That's going to go down in Arizona, South Dakota, Montana, and New Jersey. Mississippi is going to be voting for medical marijuana. Oregon is going to be voting for medicinal psilocybin. Um, in California, Prop 22, that's going to decide whether or not gig workers are independent contractors or employees. I think it's a very important uh, decision to keep an eye on because that might set the standard for the rest of the country. Also,
Hmm.
Prop 24 and what tech companies can do with your personal data. That could also set the precedent for federal legislation. And all the humanity forward candidates. I think we're going to have in that front more losses than wins. I won't get into who I think is going to win, who's going to lose, but I will say I think 26 of those candidates are going to lose, 23 are going to win, and there's 3 races that are so close that I don't think you can even really predict who's going to take it.
Hmm.
So
Can you
I think we are going to
can you
have.
can you back up a second and explain what Humanity
Yeah.
Forward is to the people who may not be familiar?
So Humanity Forward is an organization that was started by Andrew Yang after he dropped out of the presidential election. They have done a lot of excellent relief work during the pandemic. They've were able to provide cash relief to individuals, to basically anyone who asked for it. Um, it was it was a really great program they had set up there. Um, but they have also endorsed a bunch of candidates. Well, 55, I think, if I do that math in my head right, which I'm probably wrong, but somewhere around 55 candidates that are up for election on Tuesday. That most of them, not all of them, but most of them support and endorse a UBI, a universal basic income, that is either identical or very similar to what Andrew Yang was running on. Some of them are, well, I'll say many of them are much more progressive than what Andrew was. Things when it comes to immigration, when it comes to Medicare for all, those types of relations with China, those things are a little different than what Andrew stood for. But universal basic income being the most important issue of them. We will have people elected in office next year. Well, they're going to win their election on Tuesday, and they will be in office next year, which I think is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah.
I think. Well,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
there's some people on this. There's some people on this list that I don't really agree that should be on there. Like people like John Hickenlooper. Like, did you really have to endorse him? It's like we all know
this is
he's not.
w- I saw that.
Oh,
Why
go
was
ahead.
he so he supports universal basic income?
No, he might support pandemic relief,
Believe.
type
Uh-huh.
legislation, but
Hmm.
he is not running on UBI. Maybe him and maybe him and Andrew have had a conversation where privately he is way more open
Yeah.
to the idea. But yeah,
Yeah, that's weird he's on that list.
um,
I like Hickenlooper though. He's a businessman. You know, he was running for president. He dropped out early on during the Democratic primaries, but yeah, I actually liked him, and now he's running for Senate. He's I guess trying to knock
mhm.
off the Republican I think who currently has that seat. I'm not sure his name offhand, but he's a business guy. You know, I generally like the idea of having people with business experience in government, and I know that I think Trump kind of was supposed to be this genius business guy, and he was supposed to fix all our problems and everything. And I think a lot of people are thinking we don't need another business guy. It was a bad move. I don't think that's accurate. I don't think Trump is your typical business person. You know, I think he was more of a showman than anything else. And there are some possible shady things in his taxes and whatnot that might show he's not the business genius that he may actually be. I don't know though. I don't really know. But John Hickenlooper, he's a business guy. He's a beer guy. He owned a brewery, and I like beer, so I kind of like John Hickenlooper. He signed the first. He made Colorado the first state to legalize recreational marijuana, and he was the governor who signed it into law. Because I think he was the mayor of Denver, then he became the governor, I think, and now he's running for Senate. That's what it is. So I kind of have a positive outlook on Hickenlooper.
Yeah, he's done a lot of great things. Yeah, I definitely, I don't hate or I don't really dislike John Hickenlooper, but yeah, he's a good, decent man who I think would be a good senator. I just don't think he fits the. I don't think he fits in very well with the humanity forward candidates. I'll say it that way.
Right, I hear you.
He like Tim Ryan is also on that list. I think Tim Ryan has definitely gone to bat for Andrew Yang way more than John Hickenlooper has. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe John Hickenlooper is Yang Gang to the fucking core, but I doubt it.
Yeah. But yeah, that's interesting. He's on there. Anything else before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so. I think people that are following the Humanity Forward stuff real closely, I think they're going to be disappointed in a lot of these races. People that they've been really putting their weight behind, especially on Twitter. I don't want to say people specifically, but I think there's going to be a little bit of a heartbreak, and the people, a lot of these Humanity Forward candidates that are elected, many of them you are unfamiliar with, that most Yang Gang folk will be unfamiliar with. But hey, a win is a win, and God damn it,
there'll be a few wins.
I'm pumped.
There'll be a few wins. Yeah, I'm excited too. Very excited. I'm nervous. I kind of want to get this done with, but it's going to be a wild ride. I don't know. I'm out of thoughts. I guess this is a good place maybe to wrap up. What do you say?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right, everybody. Hopefully, it's actually Halloween right now as we're recording this, so it'll be the day after Halloween.
Oh yeah.
When you're listening to this. So Jeremy, happy Halloween. And to everybody listening, hopefully everybody was safe last night, and hopefully you got more tricks than COVID. Hopefully everyone had a safe Halloween, and we will be back after the election with post-election analysis. Probably the Saturday after the election. It's going to be a fun one. Everyone just be safe and try to keep socially distant on the lines while you vote, and make sure you stock up on groceries, because who knows what's going to happen. I'm going shopping tomorrow, and I am stocking up.
It's not a bad idea.
Alrighty.
All right. Be sure to like, dislike, share, subscribe, comment, and we will see you all on the other side of a civil war.
Yeah, we'd love to get some thoughts. So anyone who's got any thoughts, comments on anything, please send them our way. And if you want us to cover something specifically, let us know, and we will look into doing that. All right. Have a good night, everybody.